have you here today. And I'm really jazzed to be joined by three awesome experts from Schema App. We know you joined from all over the place, so feel free to put in the chat. Tell us where you're from. Also, if you didn't get the chance to ask your question in prep for today, all good. Put your question in the chat and our team will sort of make a note of it and we'll look to address it during the show. Or if we don't, we'll send you a follow-up sort of with our answer. I'm super excited to introduce this wonderful panel. If you don't know who I am, my name is Martha Van Berkel. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders here at Schema App. I grew up at Cisco in enterprise, and so I learned a lot about the challenges of doing innovative and things with agility when you're in a large organization. And a lot of those things are what we've kind of pulled into Schema App. And fun fact about me is I used to drive a 1965 Austin Healey Sprite. I used to bomb down the streets of Toronto. And my actual car was in the movie called Losing Chase that was directed by Kevin Bacon. And so Kevin Bacon used to drive my car. Now, why I love this is it's a great example of how AI and search engines infer that they can win things, such as the Kevin Bacon game, when they understand the relationships. And that's really what we do here with Schema Markup. Now, with no further ado, let me introduce my panel. First, I'd like to introduce my co-founder, Mark Van Berkel. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Martha. So I'm also a semantic technologist, and I love making meaningful connections in the data and with people. So I'm founder of Schema, CTO, and alumni of the University of Toronto, where I really get into semantic technology. And over to
Jasmine. Welcome, Jasmine.
Thank you. So I am one of the product managers here at Schema App. I'm an alumni of the University of Guelph, where I worked on a massive linked open data project. So I know a lot about ontologies and taxonomies. And I'm also really excited to get to talk about semantic technology related things. And you'll notice at the bottom of my knowledge graph is a colleague relationship, which links me to my colleague, Kevin.
Thank you so much for having me. My name's Kevin. Of course, I work for Schema App. I'm one of our senior customer success managers here. The enterprise customers I work with all are, deeply invested in SEO. So I know a thing or two about SEO, and so does Schema App. So a nice little connection there. Happy to be here. Thanks so much, Martha.
All right, well, let's jam right into the first topic. I just want to take a moment. There has been a lot going on in search, a lot of announcements. Even just this week, we got a ton of announcements. So I wanted to just make some highlights that are really relevant to Schema App and to Schema Markup. The first, if you missed it, in March, both Google and Microsoft confirmed that they're using Schema Markup for their generative AI and large language models in order to understand, scale, and do it cost effectively. So this was, great feedback, great clarity that the work that we're doing here at Schema App, if you're doing Schema Markup, is being used in this new world of search. Now, this was followed on in April when John Mueller went on stage and talked to, using the words critical about using Schema Markup and sort of future search features. And then also went on to even talk about how they're using it for targeting. So I thought those were sort of, additional sort of insights on how they're thinking and using it. It's also been interesting, sort of like through May, that new research has been coming out about just like how much zero click we're seeing in AIO. And I think with AI mode being announced yesterday, and actually, like I said, further lack of clarity on metrics and things that we're going to be able to get there, we are still seeing sort of that number increasing. Now, what's also interesting in the same study from Bright Edge is they did call out that robust schema markup is seeing higher citations in AIO. So good news. We can actually, control how we're showing up and or say influence it with schema markup. And also that entity-based SEO is helping content 3 times more likely to be cited. Well, good news. Jasmine is our product manager of Entity Hub, which is all about entity SEO. And we're going to be talking about that today. Now, 2 other announcements from Microsoft that I thought were interesting. One is around this NL Web. Now, NL Web was created by RV Guha, who's the same founder and creator of RSS as well as schema.org. And what's really cool about NL Web is that they're really trying to create a way for web publishers to actually make their websites AI agent ready. And guess what? They're leveraging structured data to do this. So, sort of a different kind of aspect, sort of new things coming out from Microsoft around sort of how it's enabling them in this sort of agentic world. Now, also from Microsoft this week was actually them calling out the role of structured data with Index Now. Now we know Fabrice Canal always talks about Index Now and how Index Now, you're telling them that like the page has been updated and it's ready to be crawled. Well, they're calling out now specifically that they're using structured data to understand what has changed on the page. So if you weren't convinced before, good news for all of us that have been sort of schema markup enthusiasts. Like the time is now to do schema markup, to do it semantically in an advanced way in order to really show up in this new world. Now, final win. Thank you, Google. Love when you bring clarity. Just this morning or end of day yesterday, they published new guidelines on ways to ensure your content is performing in Google's AI experience on search. And high five, structured data is on that list as things that you can do in order to stand out. So we're really excited here at Schema App. It's what we do. We do enterprise schema markup all day, every day. And we are just so excited to be innovating, especially in this new entity SEO space. All right, enough about the market. Let's get into the questions that you sent us. And I see some great questions coming in here as well. First I'm going to do is, before we get into the questions, let's talk about like the value. And the value is evolving. And at Schema App, we've been really thinking about the value in the context of this house, or sort of this content optimization house. And so you see schema markup at the bottom, and the schema markup's like, that foundation of the house, which we then enhance when we do entity linking. So internal entity linking, where you're referencing internal entities within your own website or within your own graph. External entities, where you're defining things with external definitions like Google and Google's knowledge graph. And when we do those things, we build this robust data layer called a content knowledge graph. Now we have experts on the phone in semantics with Mark and Jasmine here, and so they'll go into a bit more about sort of why that matters. But when you build a content knowledge graph, you unlock this SEO value. So rich results, which have been around for a long time. Non-branded query performance is something we've seen really over the last 2 years, and now citations and AI overviews, right? So as the metrics are changing, we know in the SEO world, structured data is unlocking those values. Now, in the content side, we're also seeing that you can both map and get insights into what entities your content is talking about. And over time, that you can also then sort of see where are those content opportunities. If I want to be an authority, what do I need to write more about? And then the third area that we've been working and talking to enterprise clients about is really about unlocking AI. And this isn't necessarily AI in the context of search, but all those internal AI initiatives that are really needing data that's ready to be consumed by these large language models. And so if we as SEOs do amazing, good semantic structured data, we're building that content knowledge graph, we're getting that data ready, and then we can help the IT teams and the CIOs unlock their innovations by having that website content ready to go. So this is like the value we see. It's much broader than just rich results, as you can see in search, but really enabling content optimization across the whole marketing team powered by data. Okay, enough of me talking. Let's switch gears and go to another one of your questions. So the question is, in this age of all things AI, how much does schema markup implementation matter? So Mark, you're our semantic expert on the panel. Let's hand it over to you. Oh, you're on mute.
Apologies for that. I'm sorry. And if you hadn't been convinced already from all the news and the updates, that's really coming super fast. Like the two from Microsoft were in the last week. Like, be convinced now, because of all of the changes. From Gemini's been using schema data as an essential part of their knowledge graph from the beginning, essentially. ChatGPT recently announced, as Martha's pointing out, and the natural language web from Microsoft. Altogether, that's really interesting. The schema markup really provides a kind of a data format for grounding the hallucinations, and the quality of the AI systems is really as much dependent on the data as it is on the advancement of the models. Like it still should be coming back to the data to ensure that the facts that it's including are correct. And so the schema data is still an essential element, and you're seeing this in how the schema markup is showing up in these other big knowledge graph and in the big enterprises. So absolutely, it's still relevant, and LLMs can use that data during their crawling, their indexing. Not all of them use it, but it's for sure, the direction's pretty clear. It's a base layer, kind of a way to ground those hallucinations.
Yeah, I like to think like the ones who are doing crawling at scale, Microsoft and Google, they're the ones kind of calling out that it absolutely is required. Thanks, Mark. Kevin, I'm going to go to you. We talk about schema markup working still. We talked about that SEO kind of value piece. Questions around how do we test it? How do we measure it? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, again, I love this question because we've already seen all these different updates from like Microsoft and Google showing us like the value of schema markup, especially now. But in terms of like how we're measuring the value of schema markup, of course, we can look and see which results are still performing. So this is some anonymized data from a variety of our like different customers, but we can see like review snippet rich results continuing to drive high CTR improvements, job listing like rich results still doing the same thing, and product snippet rich results also doing the same thing. So when we're talking about schema markup and like unlocking these rich results, we can see that this is continuing to perform, and we're seeing this across our customer base. We've also done some additional pieces around like the impacts of how does schema markup and like support non-branded queries. So this is with our entity linking features, where we're talking about these different things that are being defined or described on your website, and using these like authoritative same as values to help be really specific to what they are. So what we will have done is taken a look at page sets that are mentioning these things with either a before and after perspective, as well as a year-over-year perspective to account for seasonality. But then what we're really doing is like measuring like what are the queries that are like showing up or driving traffic to these pages. So this is an example from one of our customers where we're talking about these non-branded queries after having these the entity linking applied. We've seen clicks growth and impression growth. And the exciting part here that I thought was really exciting, at least, is when we're talking about the non-branded queries versus branded queries, we're actually getting more clicks and more impressions by implementing this after, again, comparative to the branded queries. So non-branded queries doing better with the same as values being applied through the schema markup.
If you want more examples, our website has a ton of case studies or some recent ones that were just published. So it's not sort of like resting on our laurels. Like this is like real-time information that we're seeing across our customer base. Okay, we've talked a lot about entities. You're talking about like that's sort of the secret sauce to getting this non-branded queries. I talked about it being sort of, robust part of like building and unlocking that content knowledge graph. Jasmine, can you kind of walk us through like what is entity linking and share some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So before we can talk about entity linking, we first need to define what an entity is. So an entity is a thing with specific attributes. Thank you. Which means it could be anything from like a person, a place, an organization, products, services. Anything that you're talking about in your content is an entity. And to get a little bit more specific, we use schema markup to talk about the entities within your content and make sure they're represented in a machine readable way. So here at Schema App, we actually have a process that will automatically identify the entities mentioned within your content and then connect them in your structured data to corresponding entities found either on your own website or within external authoritative knowledge bases like Wikipedia, Wikidata, or Google's own knowledge graph. And you can see in the image here an example of this where Jaguar has been recognized as a brand that is well known enough that it also appears as an entity in all of those knowledge bases that I mentioned before. So the reason that we do this is because, as you just saw with some of the data that Kevin just shared, it improves the visibility and discoverability of those specific entities within search engine results. And this then means that it can help consumers find the right information within your content at the right time, and that supports them throughout their buyer journey.
Love this. We asked, like we said, we were going to ask us anything, and let's go technical. Some of the requests have been to like have a more advanced. So let's go into the advanced question. What's a KGMID? So Google's Knowledge Vault ID. What's the difference between a /G and a /M? Don't worry, there's going to be examples. So if you don't follow the questions, we're good here. And then can you provide examples of how linked entities using Google's knowledge graph? So Jasmine, I'm going to throw it back to you since this is, again, an area that sort of you're building up the Schema App product on.
Yeah, I hope you guys are really excited about a history lesson. So basically KGMID stands for a knowledge graph machine identifier. So this example, you can see some of the text highlighted in the search bar there. That is the identifier for artificial intelligence as an entity within Google's own knowledge graph. And you can find these identifiers through Google actually has an API that you can use. You do have to set it up yourself. You can also find the identifiers for these entities by searching for an entity within Google search. And if it has a knowledge panel that pops up, you can click on the 3 little dots to share it, and you'll see a click to copy link. And if you click on that, it will take you to that entity, like a web page or a SERP that represents that entity that also will contain Google's identifier. And you'll notice that in this example, it contains /m. Sometimes these IDs contain /g, and now I will explain why. So way back in 2007, which feels like ancient history in terms of how far we've come, Freebase was created. So this was a massive linked open database that was owned and operated, publicly available data. And Google actually ended up taking this on and thinking about 2010. We move to the next slide. Thank you. So Google acquired Freebase, and all of the Freebase entities started with /m. So this is just a legacy thing from Freebase. Now, in 2012, Google actually introduced their knowledge graph. And then from 2015 onward, the new entities that were added by Google contained /g instead. So really, it doesn't matter whether an entity contains /m or /g. It still works as an identifier. It just happens to be a piece of legacy data. So this also explains why when you're looking for entities within Wikidata, you can find the Google Knowledge Graph identifier by searching for the Freebase ID. And if you click on that link, it will again take you to the search engine results page that represents that entity as associated with the entity within Google's Knowledge Graph. So this here is showing a screenshot of what the entity linking kind of looks like within Schema App. So once we've implemented it, we will provide you with a report of all of the entities we've identified, and then links to those entities as they appear within those other authoritative knowledge bases. So you can see the artificial intelligence identifier there. And then if you go to the next slide, this is what it looks like when it's embedded in your structured data. So we've identified all of these things, we figured out where they've shown up in these other databases, and we're embedding it in your schema markup to make sure that the search engines and other web crawlers deeply understand what entities you're describing within your content.
So there's an question here from John that I think I'll ask now because I think it's really relevant to hear. But is there an equivalent of KGMID in Google's product graph? Do we know that answer?
That is a great question that I'm not able to answer. I don't know if, Mark, you know more about the Google product graph?
No, not specifically, but I'm reminded of a conversation long ago with Guha where they were talking about doing identity based on all the properties. And if you can just imagine that your schema.org properties for identifiers like GTIN and SKU, those things, those all help to provide an identity that would disambiguate between different things within Google's knowledge graph. So I don't know for sure, but I do know that those identifiers help to register as a unique concept or to try to disambiguate.
All right. Thanks, Mark. All right. Let's keep asking the questions. Love it. We're still on ad IDs. Again, we're getting nerdy here. Mark, I'm going to go to you on this one. So does the full markup referenced by an ad ID need to be on the same page, or is it sufficient to have a consistent ad IDs across the site with only the most authoritative pages defining the ad ID?
I think of this as like Lego blocks. So like each of those entities or data items that have an ad ID is a kind of a universal identifier. And we use them, or you'll see them in Google's documentation also as a URL. So a locator, like a place on the internet which you can find a thing. And so if you refer to the same building blocks across different pages, you can see the intersection there in the two simulated pages. One's kind of borrowing from the other page some of the content that may be mentioned. And so you can kind of think of these like Lego blocks that kind of like can span across your website, and you can reuse them in different places. Those references are built up into Google's knowledge graph. So Google for many years has been crawling or like actually looking at those ad IDs, and the crawler was following them just as like they're a hyperlink in your HTML. And so we know that they're following those paths. They're trying to reconcile those identifiers in its system. And we ended up taking like very early on a kind of the second degree properties. So if we mention a concept that's on another page, we'll bring in its direct properties and the things that it describes it as a default. And that worked until Google introduced some rule or some feature that it would then show up as an error. So we would have to override and say, well, in some cases we may need to show less or show more data from those reference things. But all you would need to really do is just have an ad ID to kind of declare that this is a concept that's in the graph. And so for Google, that works good. But if there's errors and stuff, we often have clients who would prefer to have those errors resolved and then kind of go back to that default.
Okay, quick follow-on question from Ryan here. Does GTIN make sense as an ID, or like how do you pick the ID?
Absolutely. Yeah, like use all the IDs, to be honest. All the identifiers that you have. So there's GTIN 8, 12, 13, 14, I think. Those are different variations for just some older identifiers, like from the barcodes. And the longer ones are, I think, some of the newer ones, but they absolutely work. Yeah.
All right.
And there's just a different property for each one.
All right, we're going back to Jasmine. We talked about content knowledge graph, right? I said this was like a foundational piece of like unlocking these values. You kind of talk us through how you build that?
Yeah, so you can do it in 4 easy steps. I'm kidding, they're not actually very easy, but to distill it down to like the simplest steps to follow, first you need to create your knowledge. That means having high quality content on your website, which I know is really important to everybody on this call. Anyone who is dealing with web content and SEO, you know that quality matters. And then you want to take that content and mark it up using the schema.org vocabulary. You then want to host that data somewhere. So once the schema markup, once you're done that authoring process, you need to make sure it's somewhere where it can be retrieved or queried. You then want to curate that data. So make sure that it is accessible, it is correct, and it is complete. And entity linking actually really helps with that completeness piece. And then lastly, you want to deploy that content knowledge graph. So publish that schema markup so that it's available externally for search engines or large language models to consume.
Easy peasy, right?
So
This
easy.
is like, this is the world we live in at Schema App. It's what we love to do. Let's keep going. Jasmine, this one's for you as well. So I've been implementing Schema Markup for over 10 years. Way to go, part of the crew. But I still don't fully understand the actual implementation of a knowledge graph. It is used in the background to direct entity markups, or is it actually deployed on the website itself? All right, over to you.
Yeah, I love this question, and it's confusing because it is confusing. So when we're talking about knowledge graphs, it can mean a lot of different things. And there's a few different types of knowledge graphs. So some of the most common ones are open knowledge graphs, which are published online. And it's usually content that's been made accessible for public good. So think like DBpedia, Wikidata, kind of Wikipedia, which isn't necessarily a knowledge graph, but can kind of be leveraged in that way. And then you have enterprise knowledge graphs. So these are internal to a company and they're applied for commercial use cases. So if you have received product recommendations on Amazon, or if you've gone on LinkedIn and it's suggested that you connect with certain people, it's because they're using knowledge graphs behind the scenes to say you are an entity or these products or entities that are interrelated. So they're using that for their own kind of internal product creation purposes. Google's knowledge graph kind of straddles both of those, where you can access information about those entities, but they also are using it to create or refine their existing products. And then the content knowledge graph is the one that you are constructing with Schema Markup. So this is, I would almost call it like closed in the sense that you are the one who's in control of creating it. Other people can't edit it for you, but it's public because you are publishing it on your website. So you are creating your own knowledge graph by adding Schema Markup, using identifiers, interlinking things. And then you're also leveraging external knowledge graphs by linking to those, doing entity linking using the same as property. And then if you're ever at a point where your enterprise actually wants to construct their own internal knowledge graph, it means that you can import this entire data layer in and build on that for your own internal purposes as well.
Yeah, and there's a difference, I think, like Schema Markup, people think about it as a page, like it becomes a content knowledge graph, like when you do define all those connections. And at Schema App, we happen to be a semantic technology company, so we actually store things in an ontology in Amazon Neptune, because like that's the world that we live in. But it's like those connections, those relationships and are so important, as well as the ad IDs that we talked about, right? In order to kind of make that real. Shout out to Jasmine, who recorded a training that you can take for free on content knowledge graphs as well as on Schema Markup 101. So if you want to learn more, I believe Gracia on our marketing team has shared that link in the chat. It's free. We want to teach you and kind of help you learn more. All right. Lots more questions. We'll get to some more of them. Let's go through some of the ones that were submitted previously. Kevin, over to you. How can Schema Markup help with AEO?
I mean, from here, we've been seeing like all sorts of feedback from both Google and Microsoft, reiterating the importance of structured data to ensure that the content performs well on their AI experiences. Google just released a note yesterday to make sure that the structured data is like available and ready to read, and also like helps match the visible content on the page. And then again, as we were talking about earlier, like Microsoft with Index Now, reiterating the importance of having all of that structured data pieces, again, updated to support their AI experiences. But we've also seen from a variety of other experts across the industry. So this is from like one of our friends from Bright Edge posting an article on Search Engine Journal, where he was describing that the importance of AI optimized content has structured data. And he's noting that pages with robust schema markup are being cited at a higher rate. Again, we chatted about that like earlier, but then like Kevin Nindig from the growth memo, he was also mentioning how important it is to like package answers for skimmers. And he was mentioning that like schema matter more than ever. I think I saw another question in the chat, but around, you know, what types of schema markup. So this is where I think that still leaning on FAQ, how to article style, like schema types, still really valuable. Google doesn't award FAQ or how to rich results anymore. But again, I think that we're just seeing the experience pivot to, again, these answer engines and making sure your structured data is packaged in such a way to really call out what your questions are or your steps for a particular task.
Yeah, we actually wrote a great blog on what was working for Schema App. So I'll have Grisha and the team share it, where if the title of your blog is a question and you answer it sort of in that first paragraph in a really kind of direct way, and then give all the evidence and the rest of the story below, we're seeing those really, really work great. And we've shared sort of all of how we've done it and what's working on our blog. So I'll look for the marketing team to share that in the chat for you now. All right, thanks, Kevin. It's working for AEO. We're seeing those citations increase. We've seen that on evidence in sort of measurable platforms like Conductor and Bright Edge that our clients use. Let's talk a little bit more about entities, though. So, Jasmine, I'm coming back to you. Content people do keyword research today, but this new world is talking more about entities. These like kind of three-dimensional things that you talked about before, things with properties. Can you tell us a little bit about that evolution? Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you, because I would have just kept going. So the primary difference here are that keywords are like textual, right? It's what you write, it's at the text level. Entities are what the machines understand, and they're at the knowledge level. So there's a key difference between being able to say capital of Ontario and a machine understanding that you mean the entity Toronto without actually having said it. Right? So keywords may not actually capture intent or semantic meaning, and clustering them into broader topics tends to be more important than actually doing work on individual terms. If you're clustering them properly and you have a lot of content that covers those desired topics, you're just going to perform better. And you can leverage entities to help establish the context, the connections, the relationships, and improve semantic relevance to move beyond simple keyword matching. So really, this is getting at the fact that getting the right content to the right users is fundamentally a semantic challenge. It's not keyword centric. The keywords still play a role, but really it's helpful to think about how well covered you are for your individual entities and then their related topics.
All right, so more about topics and entities. Mark, we're just going to build on this, right, with a question straight to you that builds on this, which like, is it better to convert all the content on a page or article into structured data, or focus more on an overview of the content, such as an outline of the page and its topics and entities and how they're connected? So Mark, over to you.
Yeah, I think it depends on exactly what use case you're aiming for, what your goal is, because there really is a kind of a diminishing return and more maintenance that's required if you're going to do the entire page with like a very nuanced kind of schema markup. And that's because I don't like Google is good or really good at extracting data from your web pages from tables or from inferring the data from your content. And so if you're just trying to reproduce it for that, like Google's pretty good at doing that already. So you can satisfy your rich results using schema. I do think adding topics to be really clear on those key terms, key topics, and entities is still something that you would want to do and would provide a comprehensive schema markup. But that's still not doing like all the page structure. And for add-on tools, however, though, there may be other kinds like vertex search. So that's a Google on-site search. So they have ways in which you can customize the site search using the schema markup. So maybe there's some data you really want to provide. It has no value to the Google's rich results, but maybe it's useful for that tool as an example, or the same thing for NL Web, like that's going to be picking up the schema markup. And so maybe those properties are essential to some other consumer. And so if you're trying to go like fully down that path, that would make sense. Like you may want to go even more comprehensive, but again, it's a bit of a diminishing returns on the entire effort.
All right, Mark, I'm going to stick with you. And there was a question in the chat that I'll build on to this one, but like, if large language models are hesitant to read JavaScript, right, is it better to implement schema markup in a more robust way, such as using PHP? And like, what are the best strategies to prepare data for large language models? The question we also got in the chat was like, is hosting schema in Google Tag Manager a good idea? So kind of plays along that same piece.
So the best is to get it server side. So the main thing, if you can imagine that a crawler coming through having to load the JavaScript, then they have to render, they have to wait for the things to load and then render. It adds an extra, 5-10 seconds of server time that is more expensive to run and more expensive and slower to do. And so if you think of your crawl budget, it's the same concept. Like if Google's going to give you 100 minutes or 100 seconds of compute time, do you want them to have it all the time spent rendering JavaScript, or do you want them to touch more pages? Like it's easier, it's faster. So you can get server side. That's it. That's just like obviously the most preferred option. That said, Google is really good at rendering JavaScript. They've kind of set the bar. Bing is also supporting JavaScript. Not exactly sure which tools they necessarily would, like if the latest JavaScript frameworks, if they're like, you'd have to do some testing to see if that would work with Bing and for its toolkit. But generally speaking, you want to make it server side if you can, and if you don't have that option, you can use other integrations. So if you're wanting to use for large language models, I was mentioning Martha even this morning, like for JavaScript heavy sites, an LLMs.txt might be a way to, if you can kind of think of it as like a pre-rendering solution. It's basically pre-rendering your HTML as like kind of a plain text format for LLMs to read. That could be a good option, but I don't see a lot of support yet on the LLMs.txt. But I do see a lot of activity on this model context protocol. And so this is something, if you're not familiar with it, to kind of to consider, especially around LLMs. It was invented by Anthropic, and it's a protocol for exchanging data between the clients, like the tools in which you're using and chatting with an LLM, and your services. And so it can provide a way of messaging the data back and forth and accessing the information that could be in your schema data and on your web pages. And so that's a really interesting way to kind of simplify and have like a broad support of tools. And so right now that protocol has picked up a lot of steam. Anthropic invented it, ChatGPT is on board, and DeepMind also has adopted it as well. So it's been a really interesting way to kind of get your data into the tools that you're using, and it depends on which kind of tools you're using. So hope I
Interesting
covered all of
question.
that.
Yeah, I think you covered it, but there's a quick one here, which is like, can you discuss the idea of having schema that is only intended for the search engine and LLMs? I was thinking more like just intended for LLMs. I know with Schema App, like we've made it so you can set like which robots get to crawl your schema markup, so you're kind of controlling who's
Yeah.
consuming it. But any other thoughts, Mark, on that?
Yeah, that's right. We actually making a feature enhancement on that today to add more bots in by default. So basically, when whoever's on the web page, if it's a bot or a person, they'll make a request to the server, and the user agent is basically an identifier of I'm a bot or I'm not a bot, and you could respond differently for each one. And so if you're only wanting schema to go to search engines, which a number of our clients like that. So it also makes it a little bit, a tiny bit faster. So there's less like response, there's less JavaScript that has to run for the users. And so it's very much like a pre-rendering kind of solution that you would see for other tools. And the same thing, you can just use the user agents from Anthropic or Perplexity and whatnot, and kind of filter based on that and just respond to those.
All right. Thanks, Mark. All right. I'm going to go over to Kevin. Are there ways to use schema creatively to describe appropriate use cases or audiences of a target on your product page? So let's go ahead and jump into that.
Yeah, and I think Google provides a great answer to this already through their structured data documentation. They will tell you, like, especially for some of the properties to be looking at, like suggested gender, like age details. But I also think that it's helpful to go a little bit further and again start leveraging some of that FAQ or how-to style markup, just like nested under product, to start saying this product could be used for these particular like actions through how-to, or again, if there's particular questions that you might be asking around like what is the best use case for this product, having that just directly into an FAQ, again, nested under the product. One of the things that like just on the next slide that I think is really fun though is that this audience schema type like doesn't have to be like a defined like term, that is to say you know, just like male female, but rather is something that you can create through the schema markup yourselves. And I love talking about this with my customers around utilizing like persona if they are defining those, so that we can identify across those pages for the schema that we're applying, which audience or which persona is this helpful for. And so again, this is my view here, is that it gives us another way of like segmenting the content knowledge graph through this like audience mode based on personas that that websites themselves are defining.
All right. Thanks so much for that. Okay, there's been so many questions in the chat around Speakable. So let's go there, although I'm hoping we don't disappoint everyone with the answer that we have. But Kevin, can you talk a little bit about Speakable? Where is it at? How do you see it sort of impacting markup? So over to you.
Yeah, it's still a beta feature. There's been no updates from Google. It is still focused primarily on like new style content. And again, there's no associated reporting for it. It's only available to users in the US using like a Google Assistant device. But my perspective is I think it's worthwhile adding where like we're able, because I think as we consider like accessibility, it's just another sort of like lever that we can pull for again, having that support towards accessibility. As well, given that it is a beta feature, should Google decide to move forward with it as like a full-blown feature, I always love pursuing those beta features to be an early adopter. So I still think it's worthwhile pursuing.
Yeah, it's been a beta feature for a long time. So
Long time.
let's see what happens. There's been lots happening on the schema markup side these days. All right, Mark, I'm going to come back to you. Loved this question. Someone's an SEO manager at a CPG company, and they're prioritizing optimization for Amazon with brand websites being secondary. How do we best grasp the relationship between these platforms, and what are must-haves versus nice-haves when it comes to schema implementation? All right, over to you, Mark.
Yeah, I love a specific question like this. It's interesting. We did talk about a few things earlier around the identifiers, and again, it's coming back to the identifiers. So, how do you make the connection between your site, your brand pages, and Amazon? Well, the key in here is probably the Amazon standard identification number. So that's the ASIN. That's a specific one that Amazon would give to your product. And if you could take those back into your product branding pages, that's the best way to make the connection. And so that is another identifier. You can attach that to a product. You can attach that to an offer, kind of depending on what, if you have variations and such. It's pretty flexible, and it's been in there for a while. So you could use that, and that would be an unambiguous way to say like this. This is the identifier, and if you could do it, like a recommended option would be to then have your product listing page, and then in the offers you could say, well, the offer is actually, the URL is on the Amazon. If you're doing conversions over on their site, if you're basically just going to redirect them and have the conversion happen on Amazon, you can include the offer, say like the offer is here, but it's actually on the Amazon site. If you want to do this, go over there. We're in agreement. We have the ASIN to tell you that like unambiguously it's the same thing. And so I think that would be the ideal way to go if you could muster it.
All right. Thanks, Mark. We're going to now move into what I call lightning round, where we just have some like questions. There's also some in the chat. First one we'll jump into is someone asked around tips for creating an entity strategy. Jasmine, I'm going to go to you. Quick tip for creating an entity strategy.
Yeah, the first thing that you want to do is do an audit. Figure out what entities are being identified in your content and how frequently, and then kind of use that as a starting point to make sure that the ones that are appearing the most often are the ones that are desirable. And if not, that gives you the ability to start digging into where else they should be showing up and whether key entities are not appearing.
All right, thanks. Mark, I'm going to go to one that's in the chat. What's your opinion on using the productontology.org in your schema?
Yeah, like it's an interesting option. You could use it. It helps to disambiguate like the types, so the type of product that it is, especially. So I think it was just like as a kind of a category kind of tool. So it's like this product fits in this category in case you weren't really clear. The alternative is that you could use if you have the concept from Google's Knowledge Graph, that would be just as well as with Wikidata. So it's one option. You can do it. We used to do it, or I used to include it in the markup that I did years ago. If I were to look at it again, it'd be nice to have. It's something that could provide a bit more disambiguation. I just don't see a lot of uptake on it. So again, like I guess most things, having a sort of better identity is like use what you can, like use as much as you can to help provide declare the identity or the classification, like being as specific as possible. But I wouldn't really sweat it if it's a pain.
All right, I'm going to go to Kevin. Thank you, Mark. Let's talk about the mentions property. Is it better to put an entity of type thing or text? What are your thoughts?
The mentions property expects a thing from schema.org vocabulary, so I would stick with a thing or a subtype of thing.
All right. We have another product question. So, Mark, I'm going to ask you this one. If you have configurable products, is it better to use schema to show the available product options or individual part numbers?
I'm not 100% sure of the distinction there. I like generally, so there's product groups now that can kind of talk about the different options. If you have different sizes of shoes or different colors of shirts, those types of things, you can use a product group to kind of tie together a bunch of product options. Individual part numbers, so you can still use, oh, Kevin, you'll have to correct me on the property, but there's a property to say like there's an add-on product, something, is that something like that? So you can kind of refer to individual part numbers that would allow you to then say like this is an add-on or it's supported by, it's compatible with, that sort of thing. So if you're talking about it's like a sort of a really a different product, you could do that. You can refer to them that way. But if it's product options, that's sort of like a product group. So I think they're kind of distinct, like two different kind of concepts. If I can, if I get the question right.
All right, Jasmine, hope you're awake here. I got two entity questions coming out of the chat. Is knows about used for external entity linking?
Absolutely. You can use basically any property you want for external entity linking. You just have to be careful about what types you use. So we love using knows about because it expects anything typed as thing, which means literally any type in the entirety of the schema or vocabulary. So lots of flexibility there. But you might also want to use this for things like area served, in which case you could only link to entities that are typed as place. So you just want to be careful and intentional and know what type is expected by the property.
All right, I'm going to come back to you. Let's go. There's a great one around SaaS products and software products. I'll put this out. Who can answer it? Maybe Kevin. Is product schema markup is applicable to SaaS products or software applications? Would that be preferred? Should product schema only be used for physical products? Thoughts on that, Kevin?
I don't believe product should only be used for physical products because again, if we're talking about a service with a price, that could also be considered a product, like a haircut, for example. But in this case, what you could definitely do is use product. Absolutely. I would lean on software app first, but again, if you're not pulling all the individual properties that Google recommends, then I think you can still lean on product for sure.
Okay.
How about those multi-type entities though, Kevin? Would it be, could you use a software application that's also a product?
Absolutely. Like I think with software application, especially with Google's documentation, you're expecting a price or an offer, you're expecting a review. So there's lots of different ways of targeting it. But again, if you're not having some of those additional properties, I would lean towards like product, but of course could multi-type it.
All right, one more lightning round. We touched on this briefly, but we'll reiterate it. John's asking, how can I use schema markup and entity linking to increase the chances of my content being featured in Google's AI overviews? Jasmine, you want to take a pass on it?
Yeah, so I mean, it comes down to, even as like Google has expressed really recently, like the fundamentals of SEO still apply here. So you need to make sure that you are writing high quality content, you're adding relevant structured data, and you're only adding structured data that actually reflects the content of the page. So make sure that you're doing all of those things. And you can make your structured data more descriptive by including the entity linking. And as Kevin had mentioned, what we have seen is that there tends to be a trend in showing up better for non-branded queries that way. Still difficult to assess when you are showing up in the Google AI overviews. I know like that can be a little bit messy still, but as long as you're following those recommendations, you're definitely in a good position for that.
All right, thank you. You know, I'll go to my last lightning round question, then we'll wrap up because we're at time. What's the best way to implement Schema Markup to keep up with the rapidly changing landscape of AI? Well, I wouldn't be the CEO of Schema App if I didn't say call us. You know, part of doing semantic schema markup, doing it at scale, doing it while building a content knowledge graph, and constantly innovating with new areas, especially in how we can do entity linking at scale. It really is about being dynamic, testing and learning, and seeing what works. We are super jazzed that you decided to join with us today. We'd love your feedback. So there is a quick survey that will go out. If you can take a minute just to give us some feedback. What did you like? Did you like this format? It's a new format for us to try, kind of getting more engaging questions. And then we also have a free schema markup checklist. This sort of helps you assess your current state of your schema markup and helps you kind of decide what to do next. We have a ton of content on our blog. We have free training, as we mentioned. We also have a newsletter you can sign up for. We just really hope that you'll stay engaged, keep asking questions, and happy scheming. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.